Thank you, Madam Chair. Senate Bill 124, as amended, basically makes felony murder a Class 2 felony crime of violence with a sentence of 16 to 48 years with a mandatory 5 years in parole. Under current law, felony murder is a first-degree murder, just like premeditated murder, with a sentence of life in prison without the possibility of parole. This bill, as amended, requires that death be caused by one of the participants, not anyone. The amendment also makes the affirmative defense more clear and available, and it makes conforming amendments so that JCAP is available, and significantly, the bill is not retroactive. This bill passed out of the Judiciary Committee by a bipartisan vote of 4-1. It is a compromise bill that we worked with all of the stakeholders on. Some wanted a lesser sentence for the less culpable, and some wanted a higher sentence for the more culpable. We reached the compromise of crime of violence, F2, 16 to 48 years. Support for this bill this year was especially broad. The District Attorney's Council in years past has opposed this bill. This year, 7 district attorneys publicly came out in support of the bill, including Christian Champagne, the chair of the Colorado District Attorney's Council, came out in support of the bill, along with DA Beth McCann, Alexis King, Brian Moss, Michael Doherty, and Gordon McLaughlin, as well as Heidi McCollum in the 5th up in Summit County. CDAC itself did not take a position, but clearly a third of their membership came out in full-throated support for the bill. 2 district attorneys testified against the bill in a 3.5-hour hearing. That was the only opposition testimony we heard. We didn't hear from COVA or any others. Just recently, interestingly enough, the Americans for Prosperity came out in support of this bill. And let me read the compelling statement that the Americans for Prosperity made. AFP believes that our criminal justice system should promote public safety, preserve human dignity, and provide equal justice for all under the law. Accountability is an essential component of justice, but that accountability must be proportional based on the harm caused to the victim and the community. The felony murder, the Americans for Prosperity said, is an exception to the standard principles and violates principles of due process and proportional punishment. Colleagues, the bedrock principle of our American criminal justice system is that a person should be punished for the crime that they committed. This principle holds that we punish people proportionally and that we hold them accountable for what they did in proportion to what they did. Justice requires that accountability be proportional based on responsibility for the harm caused to the victim. We aspire to a system that is fair, equitable, and proportionate. This is what accords with our sense of justice, but felony murder is an exception to these principles of fairness, responsibility, and proportional accountability. With felony murder, liability is imposed regardless of intent. Liability is imposed if a death occurs under Colorado law to anyone in the course of committing any of 6 felonies. And that's really the gist of what felony murder is about. If a person commits any of 6 felonies, arson, robbery, burglary, kidnapping, or escape, or sexual assault, even if the harm occurs at the hands of an associate, even if the associate was not present, felony murder attaches life without parole becomes the sentence. Liability for felony murder in Colorado is imposed on someone literally along for the ride if death occurs. Felony murder holds a person guilty of first-degree murder with a mandatory life sentence when they didn't intend to kill anyone, when they didn't know anyone would die, and even despite the fact that they were not the person who caused the death. Colorado law imposes liability for felony murder as first-degree murder in Colorado without knowledge or intent to kill. The same is done for premeditated murder, pre-planned murder, murder done with malice of forethought. In Colorado, we have 3 types of first-degree murder. What you hear about most often is premeditated murder with malice of forethought. A person planned to do a killing and did the killing. The second type of first-degree murder for which life sentence is imposed is what's called universal malice, manifesting extreme indifference to life. That second type of first-degree murder occurs, the law school example is if someone just shoots at a moving train as it's going by. They don't intend to kill a particular person, but they're demonstrating universal malice and indifference to human life. The other example would be dropping a brick off a tall building in downtown during rush hour. There's almost an expectation or a reckless disregard of the expectation that a person will die. So premeditated murder, universal malice murder, and felony murder. Felony murder is the exception because no intent to cause the murder can occur. So the second-degree murder in Colorado, which we propose to move felony murder into, is murder in which a person knowingly causes death or a heat of passion crime following a highly provoking act. And being sensitive to the sensibilities of my colleague, the classic case of that is a man breaking into a hotel room and seeing another man with his wife, and that irresistible impulse to kill manifests itself. That's called heat of passion murder. It's second-degree murder. And that's where we propose to put felony murder. The result of felony murder under current law is a required mandatory sentence, even if death is unintended, even not knowing death would occur, even if they did nothing to cause death. It's a strict liability crime. It's a case of being in the wrong place at the wrong time, resulting in the wrong result. Let me give an example which I think illustrates how this felony murder operates. And this is purely a hypothetical. Adam is 19 years old and homeless. While hanging out on the 16th Street Mall, he's approached by 3 other teenagers. They tell Adam they're going to steal a car and go for a joyride. So that could be the felony. Adam goes with them. They walk around the corner. They approach the car that has just been parked. As the driver is getting out of the car, they approach the driver. One of the teenagers pulls a screwdriver in a threatening manner out of his pants and tries to push past the driver. The driver pulls out a gun. The 4 teenagers, including Adam, run. The driver shoots at them as they're running away. He misses, he hits a bystander, and kills the bystander. What crime is Adam guilty of? What punishment does Adam receive? Under Colorado felony murder law, colleagues, Adam is guilty of felony murder, first-degree murder, for the death of the bystander, even though the bystander was shot by the driver of the car. The mandatory minimum penalty, which we propose to change for felony murder, is life in prison with no possibility of parole. Adam has no defense. The judge has no discretion to impose a lighter sentence. Adam was in the wrong place at the wrong time. I suggest to you that this is the wrong approach. I will talk to you briefly about some of the witnesses at the hearing, some of whom spent decades in prison despite having not committed the crime, for frankly being in the wrong place at wrong time. We heard from people who did not expect death to occur, but were convicted and sentenced to life without parole. We heard from a lady who was actually running away from a robbery with her companion. She was caught, arrested by the police, put in handcuffs, sitting in the back of the police car. Her companion associate continues to run away. As he's being chased by the police, he turns around, fires a shot, kills a policeman. The lady sitting in the back of the police car goes to prison, life without parole for the rest of her life. Felony murder. We heard from Curtis Brooks. His picture and story were in the paper last week, who was a 15-year-old, homeless, similar incident to the hypothetical with Adam. He hooked up with others to steal a car. Someone died. Curtis Brooks spent, I think, 25 years in prison before he was released. One other factor I want to talk about with respect to felony murder, and it's something that is endemic in our criminal justice system in Colorado, and that is the disproportionate imposition of the penalty and the charge on minorities, people of color. Fully 79% of people charged with felony murder are young people of color. 65% of the people convicted of felony murder are young people of color. For any of you who have raised teenagers, you know how impulsive they are, you know how little they restrain themselves, you know how subject to pack mentality they are. So teenagers, young people, are primary people that get involved in these types of offenses. So in addition to being harsh, disproportionate, it is also discriminatory. Justice has evolved in our country. We no longer execute children. We no longer execute people with mental illnesses. Unlike England, we did not execute people for stealing food. We have evolved from this era of strict punishments. So I ask for your support for this bill. We are not abolishing felony murder, as some advocates wanted. It does not provide for the more minimal sentences that some wanted. It does not provide for higher sentences for the more culpable people that some wanted. But it simply changes the sentence from life without the possibility of parole to 16 to 48 years. I would suggest 48 years in prison is virtually a death sentence. The bill does this by changing the classification from F1 first-degree murder to F2 second-degree murder. Makes the other changes that I suggested earlier. By making these modifications, ladies and gentlemen, brings us closer to a sentencing scheme that punishes people for what they actually did and imposes a punishment which is proportional to the culpability. We convict people for what they did. Life without parole is reserved for people who intentionally kill someone and actually kill someone. The bill moves Colorado closer toward those aspirational goals of justice and fairness, with opportunity for hope and a possibility for redemption. I ask for your aye vote for Senate Bill 124.